Hello there and welcome back to another video. In this one we're going to be diving into another one of the Battletomes for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and in this case it is the Blades of Khorne, which is one of the newest Battletomes that has come out for the Mortal Realms. Much like with my other videos, we're going to be doing a little bit of a 5 things I love about the faction, and I've got to say I am something of a Khorne lover. I do quite enjoy the escapades, I suppose you'd say, of the Blood God. I quite like the idea of just smash face style gameplay, where you don't have to worry about shooting, you don't have to worry about magic, and you just fling yourself into the heart of the enemy and kill as many things as possible, which I think is quite cool. So it was quite nice to see this new Battletome popping up for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I was one of those people who bought the original Warhammer Age of Sigmar launch box back when it came out, the one that came out in first edition. And when that landed, I painted up all of the Stormcast because I thought they were going to be my faction of choice. And then I painted up most, I guess you'd say, of the Khorne side of things. But wasn't necessarily enamoured with the game during those initial forays into the new version of Warhammer. But eventually turned around a little bit more and was sort of drawn back in later on down the line. And now I do have a bunch of my models sitting, waiting in the wings to get painted very, very soon for use in a Khorne army that will sit alongside what I already have. So a lot of people might probably know that I already have a Golden Demon style army, which is based on Khorne bloodletters, as you can see here. There's my Golden Demon himself. But he will be joined by Corgus Kull, or the greater Lord of Khorne, and the rest of the pack for use in some games very, very soon. I'm looking forward to seeing where we go with that one, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we dive in. The first thing I wanted to talk about in particular was Kull himself. So one of the things I really liked about the way that they played around with the narrative is that this guy, Corgus Kull, was a character from the very, very beginning of Warhammer Age of Sigmar history. He was the model that you got in the core box, and he had a rivalry with one Vandus Hammerhand, who was the Stormcast Eternal character from the original box. So what's happened since then is their stories essentially followed through into what's happened with the newest edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, which I think is quite cool. So Vandus and Kull have had this almost endless quest of vengeance and revenge against each other across the mortal realms. And in the dying moments of the last edition of the game and the opening moments of this one, Vandus thought that he'd tracked down Corgus Kull to a particular area of the Realm of Fire, I think it was, yeah, of Akshi. But Kull had completely hoodwinked and bamboozled Vandus, as you can see in some of the story here. And so what happened was Vandus was completely taken by surprise, but Garviel Sureheart, who was one of the Stormcast Eternals characters from the last couple of editions, he had a special character model and all that kind of thing, he was beheaded by Corgus Kull, and his skull was offered up to Khorne. His body didn't return back to Azir, and in that moment, by taking that skull, Corgus Kull ascended to demonhood, and so he has left the forces of Khorne behind him in the plains of Akshi as they writhe around, killing everybody in sight. But he's now a demon, which would be very cool. I can't wait to see if we get like a Kull ascended version. That could be quite awesome. And this model's now become just essentially the Great Lord of Khorne, isn't it? Really, for your forces, which I thought was quite cool. But it's nice to see that initial storyline that came out in the first edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar was actually followed through all the way until this current edition of the game, which I thought was quite nice. The other thing I quite like about Khorne is that they have such interesting and cool characters. Like, a lot of people think that it's just about murder and slaughter That was a terrible sentence for me to try and say. But we've actually got a little bit of background behind them as well. So another one of the characters that I quite like is Scarbrand. So he was one of the first of the Bloodthirsters, the best of the Bloodthirsters. He was like Khorne's attack dog, really, would be sent out to go and kill whoever Khorne wanted him to. But during his time as Khorne's servant, Tzeentch sort of whispered in his ear and reminded him that he'd probably killed more people and claimed more skulls than his lord had done. And so Scarbrand struck at the back of Khorne's armour and took a chip off it, but that was probably about it. But Khorne wouldn't necessarily have minded if Scarbrand had simply just rushed at him and attacked him, but because Scarbrand chose to strike him in the back, he smashed him to pieces and tossed him through the realms, where he burned as a comet across the night sky, where his wings were tattered and broken, his face was messed up and ruined, and he landed in a huge pile somewhere deep within a different realm. In that, he has now fought again as Khorne's servant, and even though he harbours resentment for his master, he still fights alongside him regardless, because Khorne likes people who kill things, and he cares not for where the blood flows and the skulls come from. He just wants to kill things, which I thought was quite cool. So yes, Scarbrand is another awesome character, carries his characterful axes, slaughter and carnage, and a nice model to boot as well, I would say. I think it's quite nice. So yes, very cool stuff there on that front. Obviously, the Bloodthirsters, always very nice as well. And you can actually run a full army of Bloodthirsters nowadays, which I think is quite cool. I'm also a big fan of the demon side of things with Khorne. I quite like Skulltaker and the demon side of things, as you might have seen. I have a... here we go. I have a converted Skulltaker, which is this one here that my partner's father gave me, which I painted up in the yellow scheme. I think I'm going to get the official one as well, actually, just so that I've got him with the big skull cloak and the nice scenic base. But yes, there's my Skulltaker. So yes, I do quite like the characters and the demon side of Khorne as well, and I quite like how it all mixes together very nicely in this new Battletome, which I think is quite cool. It's good to see that the Warhammer Underworlds warband, not Warhammer Underworlds, the Warcry warband still made it into the background, and the fluff can be used alongside Karanak, which I think is a nice touch there. So you've got some options on that front, which is always good to see. And then, of course, you have the actual characters themselves, the mortals that are fighting alongside things. I did want to bring up this particular entry. So, God Eater's Son is a book, the Heldenar Fall book, which came out a couple of years ago now. And it's a really fascinating one because it follows a human tribesman who doesn't particularly like the forces of Sigmar because they never helped them when they were being attacked by the various fearsome forces of chaos that were roving around Akshi. And so he seeks to essentially destroy the forces of Sigmar and take back the lands for his own peoples. And sort of unwittingly and then willingly, he does end up giving himself over to Khorne. But what's quite nice about him and Heldenar is that he's a Khorne warrior backed up by his badass lady Kadara, who is sort of an anti-hero, I guess you'd say. He's very kind of, think Kratos from God of War in that regard, where he has accepted the powers of the gods, and in this case Khorne, but he doesn't really want to give himself over entirely to it, and he thinks eventually he'll be able to basically just survive without the gods. But he does have a big, huge gnawing maw in his stomach, and he does wear powerful chaos armor and all that kind of thing, and he is driven by rages and bloodlust. So I don't think he's going to be particularly successful, but I'd love to see more books about Heldenar Fall coming out. And this would actually be a really nice model for you to use to convert him, actually. You probably take off the Khorne icon from the back and lose the hound, but then if you gave him nice big long flowing locks for his hair, I think you'd have a really nice version of Heldenar Fall for you to use in your games, which would be very nice. So yes, Also love all of these type of characters. It's a shame that we've lost some of them, I suppose, but they could be used as stand-ins for a lot of these. The Deathbringer is obviously the newest character that was released alongside the Blades of Khorne. I like that we've got so many different characters in there that you can use to kind of personalise your army, which is always fun. And yes, it is all about just smashing face, splitting skulls and all that kind of thing. But it's a fun army nonetheless. The kind of standard, this is just on the side, but the standard rule for the Blades of Khorne is actually this one, so it's the blood tithe points. So you start with Murderlust, and then as you go down, you pick which path you're going to go down, all the way to the end where you get the Slaughter Triumphant and the Cleave Wide, the Grin of Khorne, and each of them has specific abilities that are tied into them. So as I say, you must spend your blood tithe points to use the abilities as you move down this list, and you can see there, it starts up with Murderlist, and then sort of works its way down through to there, and you'll see when you can use them and all that kind of thing too. But it's a different way of them approaching the way that they were doing blood tithe points in the previous edition of this. Sort of slightly reworking it, but making it a nice, easy flowchart to follow. I will say that there is this at the back of the book, which has a breakdown of how the blood tithe abilities work. So that's all listed on the back page for when it comes to you diving in and playing the game, which is always handy. You have your various battle formations. I am a particular fan of one of these, which I don't think is actually, I don't think it's actually listed in here, but I think it's that one that I like. Is it that one? Yeah. Yeah, so I am quite a fan of things like the Bloodbound Warhorde one. I think it's quite cool, and the Murder Host is quite nice, especially because I've got quite a lot of demons. But there's one that's like a Skull Takers Champions one, which I think is quite nice. May have come out with the Gyronite stuff for this edition, but in that, both you choose two heroes. In this case, you could choose like a mortal and an immortal character, and they actually get benefits from fighting alongside each other as they dive into the fighting, which I think is quite cool. You can find more about that on the app, actually, which is quite nice. All your character profiles, as you might have imagined, are all in here. Here's some of my characters that I quite enjoy. So obviously I wanted to say that I quite like Cult Skull Taker. So we've got Hero's Bane, which is one of his abilities. Which is for the rest of the turn while this target is in combat with this unit. This unit has strike first, but all of its combat attacks must be targeting the enemy hero. Great for assassinating. The Eternal Duel. If an enemy hero has any damage points allocated it by this unit's combat attacks this turn, and that hero is destroyed this turn, heal X this unit, where X is the number of damage points this unit has. Very nice. And then we have Drawn by Blood. Pick an enemy hero unit that used a fight ability this turn to be the target. Remove this unit from the battlefield and set it up again on the battlefield in combat with the target, and not in combat with any other enemy units. Very, very cool. So he seeks out heroes worthy of his blade and kills them, which I think is quite nice. So yes, I am quite a big fan of Skull Taker. And as I say, it's nice to see that all of those sort of classic models are still really readily available for people to dive in and pick your hands up with. I will say that I think all of those are only available as part of a single bundle. But if you were going to be playing Khorne anyway, you'd need all of them regardless. So it's like the old Getting Started Army set. But all of those come as part of that, alongside, I want to say, alongside the Blood Warriors and the Blood Reavers. So you get all of them in one set, which I think is quite nice. But yeah, so loads of your mortals there alongside your demonic hordes. Obviously you get your spearhead army in the set as well, which is the Fangs of the Blood God, which is very cool. And there's tips and hints for getting that on the tabletop. And this one is very much focused around Karanak and Fleshhound and the Claws of Karanak. You've got your Path to Glory rules in there as well. But I would say the last thing that I wanted to really focus on was a particular Army of Renown. That's the All Bloodthirsters one. So it's any monster, hero, demon unit. You cannot include Regiments of Renown. Very nice. So if you want to run All Bloodthirsters, you can. But this is my favourite, and I think it's also apparently slightly broken, but there we go. So this is the Gore Chosen Champions one. It starts with a 0-1 Mighty Lord of Khorne. Included, it must be a general. Then you can choose Slaughter Priests, Blood Secretors, Blood Stokers, the Realm Gore Ritualists, the Skull Grinders, and the Deathbringers. Cannot include Regiments from now. But, as you might have just seen from that list there, this is an all-hero list. So, if you were somebody who really wants to do Hero Hammer, this is the way for you to dive in and get that with your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's a lot of drops. Don't worry. Gore chosen champions can be picked as part of regiments for various characters. So as soon as you pick someone like the Mighty Lord of Khorne, you can then fill that general's regiment with 4 of those characters. Same for things like Realm Gore Ritualists or Slaughter Priests or whatever. So whichever way you build that, you will be able to have a certain amount of drops, not endless amounts of them based on all the different characters, which I think is quite nice. But they all come with some really fun and interesting battle traits. So you've got the one where you get to give an artifact of power to one of your characters at the beginning of the game, which is one of the ones there. So you essentially get that given based on who you're going to be fighting. You have the Brutal Lashmaster's ability, where Bloodstokers, who could normally urge units onto fighting, can do that to heroes instead. Legendary Slayers. Blood-hungry weapons used by friendly Gore-chosen champions have crit mortal. That's most of those weapons. The Red God's Eye. Gore-chosen champions have 4+ ward saves, which is insane. And then this one, which is Hate-Fueled Killers. If a friendly Gore-chosen champion unit would be destroyed before removing it from play, roll a dice on a 5+, that unit is not destroyed, and any remaining down points have no effect, and it is healed back up to 1. So you've not only got a bunch of wounds anyway amongst most of these characters, somewhere between 5 and 7, 8, something like that. But then you've also got a 4+ ward save, which is going to be stopping most of that damage 50% of the time. You also then have the ability to come back and keep fighting regardless, which I think is quite cool. You have then a bunch of heroic traits. So, well, one heroic trait, I suppose. So it's Crowned in Butchery, which adds 20 to the unit's overall control score, means that a character can hold an objective by themselves, which is very nice. And they have a variety of different artifacts of power. I think my favourite is probably the Scarring Blade, which I think is quite nice. So you inflict D3 mortal damage on this unit. For the rest of the turn, add X to the character's attack characteristics, where X is equal to the amount of mortal damage inflicted on this unit by this ability. So you cut yourself, and then you get to do more damage, which I think is quite nice. For the rest of the battle, this unit cannot use the Hate-Fueled Killer's ability, and cannot be healed. So you don't get to use that, because you obviously hurt yourself, but you become an absolute murder machine. So give that to something like a Deathbringer, for example, and just see him mist everything in front of him, which is cool. And then you've got things like the Blood Mist Skull, which is a ward 3 against damage. You can summon the Wrath Axe as part of your collection, and you also have all the different prayer laws that have added in for the Gore chosen champions. And it has been noted that you can also bring the Temple of Skulls, the big terrain piece. So we need to go back through there. It's at the end of here, isn't it? There we go. There we go. You can also take Skull Altar, because it's a piece of faction terrain. So even though it's not listed here, you could have your characters mounted on top of one of those to do some fun stuff with manifestations and all that kind of stuff. But yes, that is a very cool looking army. I think I'm going to do that Contest of Champions, that Tournament of Skulls thing, and have the Immortals alongside the Khornate Demons. Although this one does sound very cool for like an 1,000-point battle. I think it'd be really fun to just run in with a bunch of heroes. Or maybe do that as a Path to Glory army where it's just heroes. That could be pretty badass, I think, actually, seeing how that would work. But there we go. That is what I like about the new Blades of Khorne Battletome. A couple of Regiments of Renown in there as well. And your rules reference at the back. There's no point trying to get the code. I've already used it. But yes, liking the look of the Blades of Khorne. Super cool army. Really enjoy what they're doing with it. Very, very thematic. I know that there's a lot of stuff in there that will actually work quite nicely on the tabletop as well. So it's thematic whilst also being awesome and fun to use at the same time. It does still suffer from a lot of the issues that some of these Battletomes have, where a lot of the sort of generic stuff doesn't necessarily feel as powerful as you think it should do, but there's plenty of really badass and fun sort of ways for you to take your army, and also loads of special characters in there as well too. So yes, I was just slightly distracted there for some reason. I think it was about blood and death, but there we go. Let me know what you think of the Blades of Khorne in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts as always. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And later on, we are going to be talking about the Kharadron Overlords and learning a little bit more about these lovely Sky Dwarves. So yes, not long to go before we dive into that. And of course, we'll be back with more videos in the near future as well. But yes, like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And I'll talk to you folks in a new video very, very soon. Bye for now.